are mine.
This is such a powerful song. We're going to sing it's Revelation song. I think everybody knows it. It is just so powerful and beautiful words for our King. So please join us in singing.
Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Good to see everyone here in God's house today. My microphone works too, but I'm struggling with that. Sorry, Carrie. Just want to let everybody know that was absolutely Carrie's fault, whatever went wrong with the microphone. I'm joking, y'all. Goodness gracious.
It's always his fault.
Y'all woke up on the wrong side of the bed this morning. Let me tell you something. Life is not always fair, is it? Some days you wake up on the wrong side of the bed. Some days you wake up on the right side of the bed and then something bad happens, right? We're going to talk about life's not fair this morning. This is part of our message series called The Last 24. We're taking an in-depth look at the last 24 hours before the crucifixion of Christ. And we're going to look at all the things that happened leading up that last 24 hours. Remember there was a TV show a few years ago, Special Agent Jack Bauer. It's called 24. And he was a counterterrorism agent. He looked at all that. He saved the president. He saved the world. He did all sorts of things in 24 hours. It's pretty amazing. Some pretty amazing things happened in the last 24 hours leading up to the crucifixion of Christ. And we need to look at those, and we can study those, and we can learn from them. But what we want to do is something a little bit unique. As we've talked about each week, we want to put ourselves there. We want to picture ourselves there as eyewitnesses to these events this last 24 hours. And think about how you would react. Think about the things you would see and the things you would hear and the things going on, and just react to them. That's what we want to do. Today is called God on Trial. God on Trial. Turn to Matthew 26. Matthew 26, verses 57 through 66. Now, we're not going to read all the scriptures now, but we're going to refer to them as we go through the message today. I want you to think about this, and it's happened to everybody in this room. It's something that everybody in this room has had happen to them one time or another. Have you ever been unfairly accused of something? Have you ever been unfairly... Jordan's pointing at Kayla. If you've got a brother or sister, I promise you have been unfairly accused of something. All right, y'all quit pointing at each other now. Okay, all right. My goodness. I didn't realize that was such a hot topic, but you know what? You hadn't lived, you've been accused of something you didn't do. You haven't lived till you've been accused of something you didn't do. Hey, I had a little brother myself. But those things were kind of petty. Those things were kind of innocuous. Today we want to see that when life isn't fair, trust God anyway. When life isn't fair, trust God anyway. I'll speak to the kids right now. Kids, if you're in school, we're just going to talk to you. Just me and you. Everybody in the school. What would you think if you were at school one day, and you're at school, and one of the kids, when the teacher's not looking, one of the kids throws their book across the room and hits the teacher's desk? All right, now you didn't do it, right? Blake would never do that. What would you think if the teacher turned around and everybody in the class pointed at you and said, Blake did it? And the teacher calls you out in the hall and you get a paddling. Y'all probably don't get paddlings anymore, do you? Yeah. We do that. Is it even possible to paddle in school? It is. It ain't like in the good old days. Is it? Anyway. What would you think about that, Blake? How did that make you feel? You didn't do it, did you? You probably feel sad. Yeah, you probably feel sad, and you feel mad, and you probably want to punch somebody in the nose. But you know what? That's exactly what happened to Jesus. Jesus got accused of things he didn't even do. And then Jesus got punished for things he didn't even do. We're going to look at the most unfair accusation in all of history. In fact, we're going to walk through the most unfair trial that's ever been held in all of human history. The most unfair trial in all of history. The defendant in this case has already been accused A verdict's already been rendered, he's already been found guilty, and the punishment's already been decided before he's even been arrested. That's how unfair this trial's going to be. Do you know what we realize, folks? We live in a sinful, fallen world in which life is not always fair. Things get twisted up. I heard about a guy one time that was pulled over for speeding. He was speeding, and the police officer, it was his first day on the job. It was his first day being in the car by himself as a police officer. And he's got him a speeder. So he pulls this guy over, and the police officer goes to the window and he says, "Sir, I need to see your license and registration." The man says, "Please don't give me a ticket. Please don't give me a ticket. I've had so many tickets, if I get another one, my license is going to get revoked." Police officer didn't fall for it. He said, "Sir, I need to see your license and registration." The man says, "Well, I'll tell you the truth. My license has already been revoked. I don't have any license." He said, "Well, what about your registration? Where's your registration?" He says, "Well, it's in the glove box, but I got to tell you the truth. This car ain't registered to me." He said, "What do you mean this car's not registered?" He said, "Well, there's also in that glove box a gun I used to steal this car about an hour ago." Officer says, "What would you do that for?" He says, "Well, I just had some things go wrong in my life." He said, "In fact, I used that same gun that ain't registered to me to steal this car. And then I robbed a bank with it, and there's a bunch of money in the trunk. So please don't ask me to open the trunk." Well, the police officer pulls his gun out, and he holds him down with the gun, and he calls for backup. Well, within minutes, cars pile in around there. There's police cars surround the car. And the police captain gets out of his car and comes up, and he's got his gun held on the guy, and he says, "Sir, I need to see your license and registration." Man says, "Okay, but I don't understand what's going on." He hands the captain his license, and the license is him. He's got a perfectly good license. He said, "Sir, what about your registration?" He says, "It's right over here in the glove box." He said, Hold on, you got a gun in that glove box?" Man says, "No, sir, just my registration." He opens the glove box, hands him his registration, it's fine. He said, "Sir, this car's registered to you." He said, "That's right. That's right." He said, "Well, what's in the trunk?" He says, "Well, I'll show you." The guy gets out of the car, opens the trunk, there's nothing there but a spare tire. The man driving the car asks the police captain, he says, "Captain, I don't understand what's going on." The captain says, "My officer said you were speeding. My officer said you robbed a bank, you stole a car, you had a revoked license, and you robbed a bank." Man says, "I bet he told you I was speeding too." Needless to say, they let it go. Life's not always fair. But not only is today's trial we're going to look at the most famous trial in all history, it's the day God was put on trial. The day man put God on trial. One expert said this: "The trial of Jesus Christ represents the darkest day in the history of jurisprudence. The man that was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death was the only perfect and completely innocent person who ever lived. Yet he was declared guilty of crimes he never committed. Then he was sentenced to the most painful form of capital punishment ever devised." I believe he's right. Let's see how. John 18 tells us that before the trial even begins, Jesus is taken before Annas, the former high priest, about 2 a.m., and then about 3 a.m. he's taken to Caiaphas. Now, Annas is the former high priest. Caiaphas is his son-in-law, and he's the current high priest. The current high priest at any point in time was the chief justice of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was like the Supreme Court of the land. They tried all capital cases. Anytime somebody was accused of anything where they could be sentenced to death, it went before this high court called the Sanhedrin. Now, something that's interesting to me, and our first clue here that something's not right is, can you imagine being taken to court before the high priest, before the chief justice of the Supreme Court at 2 o'clock in the morning? The fact that all that's going on at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning tells us something's not right here. Something's already amiss. We already see the first clue that something's going on. The next thing is, Annas and Caiaphas were not supposed to interrogate a defendant alone ever. Only members of the Sanhedrin could interrogate a witness, but it always had to be with other judges present. Never alone. They've already broken their first rule. We're going to see that the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court that was supposed to uphold the law, was going to break many, many laws in the course of this trial. Now you need to understand, the high priest here, the Chief Justice, if you will, his job was, his duty as the Chief Justice or the High Priest, his job was to make sure before any trial started that every other judge, every other member of the Sanhedrin, and anybody observing the proceedings, that they understood how precious human life was. His job was also to point out or bring up anything, any shred of evidence that might indicate the innocence of the defendant. In other words, the high priest's job was to be an advocate for the defendant. So now let's pick up in Matthew 26:57. It says, "And those who laid hold of Jesus led him away to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and elders were assembled." Now, an interesting fact in Luke 22, we're going to use Matthew here, but we're going to refer to Luke 22, which tells us that he was taken specifically to Caiaphas' house. Now, folks, that's like the Supreme Court meeting down here at the Golden Corral. The Supreme Court, then, the Sanhedrin, was only supposed to meet in one place called the Hall of Judgment. They were never, according to law, ever supposed to meet anywhere else except for the Hall of Judgment. Ever. So we've already broken the rules. We've already got the Supreme Court assembled at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Now they're meeting in somebody's house. Something's not right. Something's not right. I don't know about you, but that tells me they had something planned before this all began, didn't they? Now, according to the law, the court had to be open to the public and was only held during the daytime. Also, in capital cases where somebody could be sentenced to death, the proceedings, the trial had to take place during the daytime and had to take place over at least 2 days to ensure fairness, to ensure impartiality. But we're going to see Jesus was arrested, tried, convicted, sentenced, and put to death all in one day, because the Jewish day starts at 6 in the evening, ends at 6 the next evening. All in one day. Seems like the rule enforcers aren't going to follow the rules here, does it? But it gets worse. Look at verse 59 of chapter 26. "Now the chief priests, the elders, and all the council sought false testimony against Jesus to put him to death." There's 3 things we want to notice here. First, the judges are acting as the prosecuting attorneys. The judge's job was not to call witnesses, and it was not to prosecute the case. The judge's job was to hear the evidence and give a judgment. Also, they're bringing false witnesses against a defendant that has not been charged with anything yet. How about that? How would you feel if you got arrested? You weren't even taken to jail, you were taken directly in the courtroom, and then they started bringing witnesses out to tell about what you've done, and you hadn't even been charged with anything yet. How do you even defend yourself in that case? Then, to ensure fairness, charges had to be brought by an outside party. Had to be brought by an outside party. But here, the charges are being brought by the judges themselves. This Sanhedrin is bringing the charges against Jesus. That was never supposed to be the case. They were to try the case. They were to judge the case. They weren't supposed to call witnesses. They weren't supposed to bring charges. Charges were to be brought by the outside entities to the Sanhedrin, to the Supreme Court, and then they were to judge the facts. So as long as we're circumventing the rules here, look at verse 60, the end of verse 60, and then verse 61. It says, even though many false witnesses came forward, they found none. But at last 2 false witnesses came forward and said, this fellow said, I'm able to destroy the temple of God and build it again in 3 days. What's the obvious problem with this? Absolutely. I was a paramedic before, many of you know this, and one time I had to testify in a capital murder case. And I remember distinctly the day they told me to come to the courthouse, the day they told me the time they were supposed to be there, I went there, and guess what they had me do? They wouldn't even let me go inside and hear what was going on. You know why? They wanted my testimony to be mine alone. They didn't want any opportunity for me to hear other witnesses that might change, that might influence what I testified to. So witnesses in a capital trial are sequestered. They're never allowed to sit in the courtroom and hear what the other witnesses had to say. But not in Jesus' trial. Not in Jesus' trial. We're just going to keep calling false witnesses till we get one to say something we like. We're not following any of the proceedings here. We're not following any of the law here. So instead of stopping this travesty of justice, Caiaphas, the high priest, the advocate for the defendant, supposed to be, in verse 62 we read, and the high priest arose and said to him, do you answer nothing? What is it these men testify against you? Now in any court case anywhere, witnesses against a defendant are cross-examined by that defense. The defendant is given an opportunity to cross-examine the witnesses. Now can't you imagine these 2 clowns that have come forth and they've said this lie against Jesus and it was a lie? They've come forth and they've said these lies against Jesus. Don't you imagine if Jesus had been given a chance to cross-examine them, to ask them some questions, don't you believe he could have gotten them tripped up? He wasn't even given a chance, was he? We're not cross-examining any witnesses. Not in this trial. Look at verse 63 and 64. It gets better. But Jesus kept silent. And the high priest answered and said to him, I put you under oath by the living God to tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. And Jesus said to him, it is as you said. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. And he continues in verse 65. Then the high priest tore his clothes, saying, he has spoken blasphemy. What further need do we have of witnesses? Look, now you've heard his blasphemy. What do you think? They answered and said, he is deserving of death. With no cross-examination of witnesses, with no chance for the defendant to defend himself, the high priest, the chief justice, closes the trial, gives a verdict, and the rest of this kangaroo court sentences Jesus to death without any opportunity for him to present evidence or witnesses on his behalf. This is why legal experts have said this is the most unfair trial in all of history. Now think about this, what I want us to think about this morning. The very Son of God went through this. The very Son of God. No procedures were followed. No laws were followed correctly. The trial was conducted incorrectly. Nothing about it was right. But if Jesus is treated unfairly, you will be too. If Jesus is falsely accused, you will be too. And if life's not fair to the very Son of God, what makes you be fair to you either. It won't be. Life's not fair. But I tell you what, the question is not whether or not life is fair. The question is, how will you respond when it's not? The question ain't, is life fair? Because it's not. The question is when life's not fair to you and life's not fair to me, how will I respond? How will you respond? And the first thing we need to remember that when life's not fair, we need to simply trust God. Remember our key takeaway. When life isn't fair, trust God anyway. Now let's go back to verse 62. Let's go back to chapter 26, verse 62, which says, "And the high priest arose and said to him, Do you answer nothing? What is it these men testify against you?" Now, here's Jesus' opportunity. Jesus' very life is on the line. He knows this. Everybody there knows this. Everybody there knows that they're deciding whether or not to put him to death for what they're accusing him of, and they had to invent something to accuse him of. They want Jesus dead. They want him gone. And here, the chief priest gives Jesus an opportunity to answer, to defend himself, and what does Jesus say? He says nothing. Not a word. Jesus doesn't say anything. And I thought, why? Why wouldn't Jesus answer here? Why didn't Jesus fire back? Why didn't Jesus tell it like it was? Well, actually there's a legal reason. You see, Jesus had been arraigned, that is, brought before a court to answer charges, even though he'd not been indicted, that is, charged with a specific offense. Jesus has been arraigned, that's brought before the court to answer charges, even though he'd not been charged with anything. So Jesus has no legal obligation to testify because he'd not been charged with anything. And in fact, in doing so, Jesus lends credibility to this proceeding. In other words, if Jesus defends himself here, at this point, he's giving this whole trial credibility. And it wasn't credible. This wasn't a credible trial. This was a false trial. So Jesus keeps silent. Let me tell you something I've learned. I've read this, and I know, and you know, Jesus was never going to be given a fair trial. Jesus knew he wasn't there to be given a fair trial. He wasn't there to be given a fair trial. He wasn't there to be given an honest opportunity to defend himself against his critics. That's not what it was about at all. Let me tell you something else I've learned. And I've got a big mouth, so this is hard. Just being honest. But it's true. When you're falsely accused, when you're lied about, when you're attacked, most of us should do exactly what Jesus did here. Simply say nothing. Most of us should do what Jesus did here when we're falsely accused, when we're lied about, when we're attacked, and say nothing. Like I say, I've got a big mouth, I know it. That's very difficult for me. Because the first thing I want to do, even before I'm given an opportunity to do so, is if I'm lied about and I'm attacked and it's not fair, I want to stand up for myself. I want to tell it like it is. I want to say the truth. But you see, when you're falsely accused, and your heart's right, and your character's right, and your motives are right, the best thing you can do is say nothing and trust God. You know, I heard this quote one time, and I really love it. It says, if you will take care of your character, God will take care of your reputation. I love that, so I'm going to say it again. If you will take care of your character, God will take care of your reputation. Too many times I've said, well, I've got to say something here. I've got to interject something here. I've got to stand up here. We've got to do something. Many times, the best thing I can do and the best thing you can do is not give credibility to people who are attacking you and telling lies about you. Don't give them credibility by saying anything. I tell you, it's absolutely true. I've seen it happen with my own eyes. And I've seen people that I dearly love being attacked, being lied about, and I gave them unknowingly the best possible advice I could give. So let's just pray and trust God to take care of it. Let's just pray and trust God to take care of it. Was that easy? Absolutely not. One of the hardest things I ever did. Because you know what? About that specific instance, I had bullets in my gun. I could have fired back for them. I knew things that I could have used as a weapon against the one that was attacking my friends. I knew I could have taken them down. I knew I could have fired back. I knew things. But I also knew what God's Word said. And I also knew I'd prayed about it. I knew I'd fell on my face at the altar about that situation. I'm not going to tell you the specifics of who it is, and it doesn't matter. The point is, I trusted God. More importantly, the people I loved that were being attacked trusted God. And God did just what He said He would. And He took care of it. He took care of it. Let me tell you something else I know. Ecclesiastes 3:7 says, there's a time to keep silent and there's a time to speak. The problem is, I always know when it's time to speak, but I hardly ever know when it's time to be quiet. That's my problem with Ecclesiastes 3:7. I always know about the time to speak. I just can't ever recognize when it's time to shut up. I always think it's time to speak. The time to keep silent part, that's what I have trouble with. But anyway, Jesus teaches us something about when life is unfair. Sometimes it's time to be silent. And sometimes it's time to speak. And it's when it's time to speak that we need to remember this. Tell the truth. Tell the truth. If you answer a lie with a lie, you're just as bad as the liar. If we answer a false attack with a false attack, we're just as bad as the attacker. In fact, that's just what the devil wants us to do. But remember, sometimes it's time to be quiet, trust God. And sometimes it's time to speak, and when we do, we need to tell the truth. Now, most of you have been walking through that trial. You may be thinking Jesus needs a good lawyer. Problem is, lawyers are sneaky. Now, I've got some lawyers that are good people that I dearly love, but they're just like four-leaf clovers. They're hard to find. I heard about a lawyer one time, and the story starts with a butcher. There's a man, he's a butcher, and he's got a butcher shop. And this dog runs in his butcher shop and grabs this pork roast and runs off with it. Well, the butcher knows that dog is the lawyer's dog, but he knows this lawyer is greedy, and he knows this lawyer is selfish, and he knows this lawyer's not going to want to pay for that pork roast that his dog took. So the butcher thinks, I'll get him, I'll trap him, I'll trick the trickster. The butcher calls the lawyer and he says, hey man, let me ask you something. The lawyer says, okay. He says, I need your legal advice here. The lawyer says, okay, no problem. He says, if a dog runs in my butcher shop and takes something and runs out with it, is the owner of that dog legally responsible for what that dog took? The lawyer said, absolutely. The butcher said, well, I'm glad to hear you say that because your dog ran in my butcher shop and took the pork roast. The lawyer said, he did. The butcher said, absolutely. The lawyer said, well, what's the value of said pork roast? The butcher says $15.95. It was a good pork roast. The lawyer says, no problem. I'll send you a check. Well, the butcher, thinking, I've got one over on my lawyer friend, hangs up the phone. He's feeling very satisfied. Sure enough, a couple of days later, there's an envelope in the mail from the lawyer's house. He opens it up. There's a check for $15.95 and a bill for $200 for legal advice. You can't trust a lawyer. Like I say, there's some out there you can trust, but they're all 4-leaf clovers. They're hard to find. When Jesus decides it's time to speak, let's look what he says. Look at verse 63. But Jesus kept silent, and the high priest answered and said to him, I put you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. Now the high priest has done something here. He's made a tremendous gaffe. He's done something stupid here. And what he's done is he has put Jesus under oath. And he has obligated Jesus to answer. How about that? The high priest himself messed up. And he tells Jesus, he says, tell us if you're the Christ. I put you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you're the Christ, the Son of God. So now in verse 64, Jesus, being put under oath, has to answer it. So look, he says in verse 64, it is as you said. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Now understand this. The phrase, it is as you said, meant yes. If somebody was asked something in this time and they said, it is as you said, that means they're saying yes. They are affirming that you are correct in your assertion. So at that point, everybody in that courtroom had a decision to make. Everybody in that courtroom had a decision to make. And guess what? It's the same decision we've got to make here this morning. So, well, I wasn't a part of that. You are now. You're under oath right now before the living God. You've got to decide something this morning. It's the same thing they had to decide there today, that day. Either Jesus was guilty of blasphemy and he's not God, or he's innocent of blasphemy and he is God. Now remember this. Not a single witness could be found to convict Jesus of any wrongdoing. That's some of the strongest evidence in all Scripture. If there could have been a credible witness brought forth that could have accused Jesus of some wrongdoing, that could have accused Jesus of sin, don't you think they'd have brought that witness that day? If there was anybody that could have stood up and said, I tell the truth before the living God, this man has done this. If Jesus had ever done anything wrong in front of anybody that anybody knew about, they'd have been there that day. Remember, they're up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. They've arranged this whole thing. Don't you think if the high priest and the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees and the Sadducees could have found one credible witness against Jesus, they'd already had him lined up. They prearranged all this. Of course they would. But no fault could be found in Jesus. Amazingly enough, that day, God was put on trial by men. God was put on trial by men. Don't you think it's ironic? Don't you think it's ironic that God was put on trial by men? But here's the thing. Those same men are going to be put on trial by God one day. And folks, look at what's going on in the world around us. I'm not going to get into current events, but if you turn on the TV, you look at the news, you see the things going on in the Middle East. Folks, our nation has made an agreement with Iran to let them get nuclear weapons. What do you think is fixing to happen? That's the same people that said they needed to get rid of the the little Satan, meaning Israel. This is the nation that we've now just agreed to give nuclear weapons to. What do you think's fixing to happen? Do you think Iran's going to make nuclear weapons and then say, oh, well, we're just going to hang on to these. We're not going to use them or anything. We just want it to happen. Do you think for a minute Israel's going to let that happen? I'm speculating here. If you disagree with me, we can talk after church. Because I need to enlighten you about some things. If you think Israel's going to sit by and let themselves get attacked with nuclear weapons by Iran, you're wrong. What do you think's going to happen when Israel stops that from happening? I see visions of mushroom clouds. I see bad things happening. Look at what's happening around the world. The world is bigger than Choccolocca, Alabama. The day that men judged God was right there in Matthew 26. But the day that God is going to judge men once and for all is coming. And it's coming very, very soon. I know preachers have been saying that for 100 years. But I look around the world and I see the magnitude of the things happening. We see the things lining up with Scripture, with end time Scripture that are happening. I see a snowball rolling down a hill that can't be stopped. Is it going to happen today? I don't know. Is it going to happen tomorrow? I don't know. But I know that day's coming very soon. That decision for every one of us is nigh at the door. Is Jesus who He said He was? Or is He not? He's given that to every one of us to decide, just like we were sitting in that court that day. He's given that to every one of us to decide. Is Jesus who He said He was? Every other decision you make the rest of your life, everything you do, like it or not, is going to hinge on what you decide about that very thing. What have you decided about Jesus this morning? Was His trial fair? No. Was anything about that done right? No. His life fair? Here's what I can tell you, heaven will be fair. There'll be a lot of people in heaven that don't deserve to be there, including me. I don't deserve to be it. But I know I'm covered by the precious blood of Jesus. And I pray with all my heart that everyone here knows that this morning.